Hey all, this is DJ, and I want to do a special introduction for this video, which is an interview with Mr. Lawrence Schick. It was originally recorded and has been posted on my podcast. I am the host of a podcast called Architects of Imagination that focuses on video game development, which is my day job. I work in video games. I have for north of 26 years, something like that. I do special effects for video games, visual effects. I own and operate a company that specializes in that. We get hired by various game companies to help them with their effects. And in my podcast, Architects of Imagination, I talk to friends, colleagues, and have special guests on, and we just talk about game dev, the industry, the state of the industry, what's going on with AI and game design theory, lots of stuff. So it was really my honor to have Mr. Lawrence Schick on the podcast. And I wanted to post that video on my Dungeons and Dragons channel as well, in that the content is apropos. Lawrence Schick is, I would regard as Dungeons and Dragons royalty. He was there in the early days at TSR. He was the editor for the Dungeon Master's Guide, first edition AD&D. He wrote White Plume Mountain, and we talk about all this stuff. So there's conversations about D&D in there, alongside of his work and role on Baldur's Gate 3, which he was the principal narrative designer for. So I'm reposting the video here. I'll put links in the description if you want to check out my other channel, the Architects of Imagination podcast. If you have an interest in video games, check that out as well. But without further ado, please enjoy my interview with Mr. Lawrence Schick. Welcome to Architects of Imagination, a game dev podcast where we talk to the brilliant minds behind your favorite video games. And before I introduce my guest today, I want to another of my passions that I haven't really gotten into much on this podcast, since it's focused on video games, is Dungeons and Dragons. It's something that I've played since I was a kid, maybe 9 years old. I currently have an OD&D game running with 1974 rules. This is my Dungeons and Dragons room at the house that I built during COVID. So saying that, it is with great pleasure that I announce today's guest, Mr. Lawrence Schick.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Schick. I'm a longtime game designer and writer. And as David says, I started out with Dungeons and Dragons back when Dungeons and Dragons started out. In fact, I started playing when OD&D first appeared, and began working on the game 5 years later, and have worked on role-playing games, tabletop and video games ever since. Mostly video games in the last 40 years, and mostly narrative games in the video game space.
Yeah, and so you were an author of one of the early Dungeons and Dragons modules that still makes, to this day, best 10 of all time lists, White Plume Mountain. You were involved in the original Dungeon Master's Guide, Deities and Demigods, and Fiend Folio, and then bounced over to video games at ColecoVision in 1982. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, and it worked in various video game studios on and off ever since.
Awesome. Including, I noticed in your Moby Games a favorite teenage game of mine, Pirates, for the C64. That was a phenomenal game. And I have you on today because we're going to mostly talk about Baldur's Gate 3, for which you were the principal narrative designer at Larian.
Indeed.
So first, a massive congrats to you, to the whole team at Larian, on this quite incredible achievement in a video game. And congrats to me and all the other players that get to enjoy it. I've got 2 sessions running right now, a solo one on my computer, and then I'm playing with my kid out of LA. And it is such a tremendous game. So yeah, congratulations on all the success that you guys have had with Baldur's Gate 3.
Thank you. I play with my kids too. And of course, it's, like all the best RPGs, it's a collaborative game. So it doesn't exist without the contributions of the players. So we are thankful every day that our community is so strong and has worked with us so closely.
And you guys just cleaned up in the awards this year. You swept the Game Awards, the Golden Joysticks, the BAFTAs, and well deserved in my mind. It is an accomplishment. I think we've had great RPGs over the years, but this one is just outstanding. So yeah, amazing work by you
Thank
guys.
you. Let me point out, we haven't swept the BAFTAs yet. That's next month.
Okay, is that
But,
next
but
month?
last night we took some more awards uh, at GDC, at the Game Developers Conference.
Yeah, awesome.
So they're still trickling in.
That's right. The BAFTAs are nominations at this point. So yeah, good luck. Good luck with that next year. Um, Talk about how much writing goes into a game like Baldur's Gate compared to say like a novel or a film. There are a lot of words and there's a lot of time, to even play through the game. It's got to be.
Okay, so yes, so I write books too, so I'm familiar, intimately familiar with what it takes to do serial media as well as interactive media. And let me tell you that the difference is there are orders of magnitude more story in a game like Baldur's Gate 3 than in a novel, because we have to provide for uh, everything that we think the player is going to want to do, because the maxim here, is uh, player choice, and if the players would want to do it, we should see if we could give it to them. We should see if we can help them do it. It's and so yeah, and insofar as everything is voiced and mocapped as well, for dialogue, that's a tremendous undertaking, and it requires uh, you know uh, a dozen and a half writers for several years, and then all of the other people who work with them, hundreds more, to make it all come alive. And so yeah, it's none of it is machine created either. It's every single thing in Baldur's Gate 3 is handcrafted. So it's it takes a huge investment of time and dedication by many talented and very passionate people. Um, uh, and I'll just ramble on for a second. There's no there's no magic to building a really big RPG. It's just dedication. You build it layer by layer by layer. It's like Japanese lacquerware. You know,
Yeah.
you make the basic shape of it, and then you add reactivity, and you add all different kinds of uh, potential occurrences, and you add side comments, and uh, every place where the player would probably want to interact with something, you give them something to say, something to hear. So we got a narrator for that, so we can give you vocalized dialogue, even if you're not talking to somebody. So, um, in as much as this is based on Dungeons and Dragons, you got to have an analog to the game master, the dungeon master.
Yeah, and like pre-write every damn thing that could possibly happen. It really shines through too, and just like you guys spared no expense, it would seem. Every Is it like pretty much every single animal in the whole game, like the rats that are around, like you can talk to pretty much any creature out there.
Yes, some of
Quite
them don't
impressive.
have very much to say, but if you've got speak with animals going, which I recommend at all times, you will find that some of them have quite a bit to say, and they've got strong opinions that they want you to hear. So yeah.
That's awesome. um, there's a ton of books sprinkled all over the game, many of which you can just sort of open and read. They're often, a page or a few pages of dialogue. Are there any? Did you do any writing in those? Are there any that you're particularly proud of or meaningfully to you personally? Is there any
Yeah, I wrote a lot of
that
those.
you recommend that people pay
You
attention
know,
to?
as the narrative designer, as one of the narrative designers, I wrote a lot of stuff that wasn't dialogue. So a lot of the world setting, um, creating plots, backgrounds, factions, antagonists, and books, notes, journals, scrawls of blood on the wall, uh, uh, poetry that comes from skulls when you click on them, stuff like that. Um, uh, I mean, everything in everything is a collaboration. Even even a book, that I wrote most of the text for, right? Um, uh, it got looked at by an editor. It got placed on a background by one of our artists. It got put in the world by one of our level designers, or set dressers, and so um, you know we don't really claim individual credit for much at all in this game. Uh, so I could point to some of the books, in Moonrise Towers that I think are particularly dense in their approach to history and stuff. But that wasn't just me. Nothing we do is any just one person. Uh, and so that's if you ask us individually what we're proud of, we pretty much usually just dodge that question because we're
Okay.
proud of we're proud of working with everybody else, and the collective experience that we deliver is what's really important.
Yeah, for sure. It is a big team that makes a game like this. So yeah, kudos to all of them. Let's talk about the blurry ethics in the game. That's something that I found really fascinating. I read an analysis somewhere that in the game, like most of the decisions you make, you're gonna find it a little difficult to know if you're making the right choice or not. Um, there's just ethical ambiguity all over the place. For example, like in the first 10 minutes, there's a character whose brain is getting eaten out by an intellect devourer, and then like, do you kill him? Do you try to save him? Like, no, there's like kind of no right answers all over the place in this thing. I thought it made for quite a stunning thoughtfulness to the game. Um, was that all very intentional by you guys? Can you talk
It
about the
is
internal discussions
it
that
is
went around that?
absolutely intentional because our approach to the story in an RPG is that there is no right way. A lot of games have got a golden path. They've got an optimal choice. And if you stray from that, the game kind of nudges you back onto it, and so players learn to look for that, and they learn to think, I really need to try to figure out what does the game want me to do here, and a lot of games specifically want you to do, that golden path. We don't do that. We want you to look at each choice individually, think about what it matters to you, and make a decision just like you do in real life, with imperfect information, uh, and with emotional and material consequences to your decisions. And because Baldur's Gate 3 is based on Dungeons and Dragons, and that's a tabletop game that you play with your friends around a table, uh, in person. And when you make choices in that situation, um, the dungeon master doesn't tell you, no, that's not the right choice. Whatever the players decide to do, the DM rolls with it. The story moves forward. Things happen. Uh, Usually, a D&D session, it's only a matter of time before it goes off the rails, right?
Yeah.
And goes off in a direction that was totally not anticipated by the DM. Um, and that's some of the best stuff that ever happens. So we wanted that. So, we deliberately designed our narratives so that no matter what choice you make, whether you think of it as a success or a failure, the story goes forward. Stuff happens as a consequence of that. Interesting stuff happens. Not necessarily the stuff you thought was going to happen, not the stuff you had in mind, but the story proceeds and unfolds before you. And so we undertake the challenge of making sure that a coherent story unfolds from disaster as well as from triumph. Uh, and there's no wrong choices. It's just choices.
Yeah, I'm feeling that a lot in my playthroughs. I was maybe a little grumpy one day and dove in and was in a fuck it all mood. And like what seemed like it was about to go off the rails, like just was a more interesting thing that occurred. I ended up in a fight in my camp with my allies. I totally didn't expect that, but it's like that kind of stuff's really cool. Yeah, amazing. Um, the one concept in the game is the absolute true souls. And by the way, I haven't finished yet. No, so no spoilers. I'm late Act 2 right now. I'm still playing through. But the true souls and the absolute, I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, that's a new concept in D&D. I don't know if that's in any of the published stuff. Anyway, is that something new that you guys came up with?
Yes, I'm not sure that, given the long history of D&D and the vast quantity of material that has been created in many different media for it, I shouldn't be surprised if that particular approach to plot hasn't been used before. But it was certainly not based on anything that we knew about. It was based upon, um, I mean, it all goes back to the Mind Flayer tadpole, and everything grows out from that. So what does that lead to? How did that happen? Why? And what would be interesting? What are the interesting options that could be associated with that? That's where that story grew from.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and one thing it made me think about too is just fan service versus kind of like keeping fresh and interesting and new. Like how do you there's such a wealth of material. I mean, we've got and happy anniversary to Dungeons and Dragons. It just hit its 50th
Mm-hmm.
birthday. All the gods have been well trudged territory. So yeah, I was a little just interested in that. Where do you sort of like, you want fan service in there, but I think of like in Star Wars, say, where it's feeling a little long in the tooth because they're just like, put the biggest, most important guys like all over the place, and it feels like with the absolute and the true souls, like you guys kind of like are paving a new path a little bit. Can you talk about that? What did you guys discuss that internally? Where
I, I
where
can
where
talk about I can talk
what
about
is
general approach. Certainly, I mean, uh, when you're making a role playing game, um, you are working in a certain genre of fiction, and so players come to your game, knowing that, for example, this is a high fantasy setting, right? Players come to your game knowing that they're going to play a fantasy RPG, and so they come to the game with certain expectations. Here's the kind of fun I'm going to have when I play this game. Um, it's an RPG, so here's the kind of characters I'm going to be able to play as. Here are the kind of antagonists I'm going to encounter. Those are my expectations coming in. So um, you have to pay off on that, for starters. You have to give the player what they came for. This is the kind of story that they want to be the protagonist in. They want to, they've seen these kind of stories in every other medium. Maybe they've played tabletop and other video game RPGs, and they want to be the heroes now, or at least the protagonists, if not heroes.
Yeah.
Um, so you give that to them, absolutely, no pun intended. And then to make it interesting um, for us, and most importantly for the players, then you start to subvert their expectations. So you have to think, okay, they they've gotten this deep into the game, and they understand what the situation is. They understand who they are, and they're starting to build a relationship with the other members of their party. Now it's time to start showing them that they're wrong.
Yeah.
Uh, that what they thought they understood was only a piece of the puzzle, and that we're going to give them more pieces to put together. And as they put those pieces together and the whole thing starts to become clear, uh, it becomes the players feel like, oh, this is more than I expected. This is more than I came for. This is actually really cool. And furthermore, I saw this coming together. I put these pieces together, and now I see how they fit. And I am able to master this situation. I'm sure of it. Let's go forward. Uh, and so, you've got 3 acts to do that in, and so you've got opportunities to keep changing it up and adding to cumulatively to what you have uh, established earlier in the plot, and their understanding of their characters and of themselves. Um, and as the game goes on, uh, you give them the opportunity to push the story and the characters in the directions that interest them, right? So that the player can make the story their own. And then the story has to be ready to accept their decisions and give them an appropriate payoff, uh, regardless of what choices the players have made. So yeah, that's our task, and that's how we look at um, genre and the expectations of the players.
That's really cool. That makes me think of like, especially like, in a tabletop game, I find it can be a little boring when a player just kind of like goes for a straight archetype. Like, I'm a paladin, I'm good, I'm gonna do all the good things. One thing I've been asking my players lately to do is to come up with a kind of a dichotomy or an arc for their characters too. So like they start here, but they end somewhere else. Like, what is that thing where you're kind of headed towards? And maybe that happens organically in gameplay, or maybe they sort of like set up a little story thing that then I can help, like reveal for them over time and the other players. But I think that's more interesting than just like, being sort of a one note thing. And yeah, and all the characters in Baldur's Gate, you kind of see that in spades, right?
Well, yeah, that's what we try to deliver is an array of options of people who you get to hang out with and play and get to know and interact with over 100-hour game. That's a you get to see character arcs left, right, and center. You and all your buddies.
Yeah. One dynamic that I've kind of found fascinating too is Shar versus Saloon, right? There's kind of like the the good and the evil, opposites of one another. I believe they're sisters in D&D canon. Uh, and it's pretty traditional to play the good guy, although Baldur's Gate is, and my OD&D game, a lot of players are going for like straight chaos, which is making things very interesting. um but I found I kind of tend to like to play sort of the heroic figure, the good guy in games. And it kind of was wonderfully like rolled out, where Shadowheart is one of my players, and you start to care about her, you're sympathetic with her, and then it starts to roll out why she's a follower of the evil goddess. And to do it in a way that made you like sympathetic to it, that it seemed like, okay, well, yeah, I guess that adds up. Because normally it's like, it, you know the bad guy is evil and does horrible things, but it was kind of laid out in a much blurrier way than that, and I loved it.
Yes, well, uh, uh, if it, if you don't have characters that are understandable in their motives, and I mean, they just don't feel real. and they're and just like real people, if they do feel real, they're going to have layers. There's going to be more to them than what's on the surface, and you're going to figure them out from the surface at first. That's because that's all you're presented with, and then over time you will see beneath the surface. And this is one of the reasons why we make atrociously gigantic games, because it takes time to make people real if you don't want them to just be cardboard cutouts. Um, so it takes time to be able to get to know characters and understand. Oh, that's how that happened to them. This is a result of their previous lives, histories, and and they themselves are both empowered and damaged by what has happened before. And as you get to know them, and they get to know you, you can, one of the themes of Baldur's Gate 3 is trust. And so if you establish trust, you can start to influence people in a way that might be good, it might be ill, but it's your choices that you're making, and the effect of influence that you are having on a person who gives you real feeling and emotion in return.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me too, like you guys kind of reinforce that concept almost kind of literally with UI elements, right? Like as you do stuff, you see this person approves and disapproves. So in your head, it's kind of like um, putting you in a position of almost tracking a little bit, like how off the rails you're going with one of the NPCs, or driving them away, or pulling them in. That's pretty cool. Um, thinking about you started your career in Dungeons and Dragons, and then spent a long chunk of it in video game development. And now here you are, the sort of culmination of both of those together now. Another Dungeons and Dragons video game.
Yep,
Uh,
unexpected. Didn't see it coming.
how does that feel? That's pretty awesome. You're sort of back to square one in a way.
Uh, yes. Well, in a way, I mean, the thing is that um, I've spent most of my 40 years in plus in video games, you know, uh, wishing for the ability to be able to replicate the tabletop experience. And it is only very recently that we are able to deliver on that. Um, and uh, and once again, it's not because we've got magic or anything. It's because incrementally we're able to layer many more levels of detail than was previously possible, so that we can approach the feeling of interacting with another human being. Um, and uh, you know uh, that's one of the reasons why Larian went so hard on the uh, not just voice acting, but facial motion capture and dynamic dialogue animation, uh, because what we had previously, for decades, was little guys talking to you on the screen, right?
Yeah,
And it's just
a little head.
you can see them from the top, and look, oh, he's got a big story, he's swinging it around, and it's just not. It doesn't feel like a person. And now we can finally uh, go back and forth between um, really fun combat and speaking to people as if they're people, and it gives an emotional depth to the experience that we couldn't previously get. I mean, uh, there's been good writing, in RPGs for a long time, going back to Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, for example, set a standard, um, and followed up by things like Morrowind and Fallout New Vegas and Dragon Age Origins, and you know, these games all had really good RPG writing and choices, um, and but there was, the human animations were kind of cranky, and
Yeah.
it took a while to get to a point where you could not be thinking about the fact that this guy's eyes are looking in two different directions while you're talking to him, and instead just focus on what you're hearing and feeling as you talk to this person. Uh, and so we finally crossed that threshold, and you know, it feels really good for us to be able to deliver that, because um, the players connect with it, and it, you know, combat games, fighting, resource management, all that stuff is fun. Emotional engagement is what players remember,
Yeah.
and so you know you got to hit them in the heart. Uh, that's what we aim for.
Yeah, 100%. And I think of like, Lizelle and Astarion in particular were just such outstanding characters and their motivations and their flaws, and yeah, they're pretty amazing. You mentioned sort of wanting to in video game form recreate that experience from tabletop games. Is there? Can you think of anything that's like the delta that might still be there? What are there things that you're like, I wish we could, like, just do this if we're still not able to yet?
Uh, I mean, absolutely. We need to be able to, for all of the various options that we're able to provide in Baldur's Gate 3, there should be more.
Yeah.
There should be
Keep going.
more, and it should. So there needs to be a way whereby it can we can deliver more in in an economical fashion. That is so. Obviously, everybody is doing this. Everybody's looking at ways of uh, increasing the technological uh, detail and sheer quantity of information that's delivered in an interaction. The fidelity that you get, like, you know, you and I are talking right now, and we are making lots of little minor facial expressions that convey all sorts of nuance. Um, and we got a lot of that into Baldur's Gate 3, but there's more to be done. And there's more to be done with physicality, and there's more to be done um, with uh, with character choice and options and depth of variation there, uh, because um, we want to be able to deliver on we want to be able to deliver the scene that the player just imagined in their head was coming next.
Yeah.
So, um, you know, I'm not going to talk about um, uh, stuff that is being researched and stuff, but Larian is an ambitious studio, and it is made up of literally hundreds of RPG fanatics. They're crazy about this stuff. We all
Yeah.
are, and so we are bound. We're just going to keep making the kinds of games we make, and we're bound and determined to make them better. So that's. I hope I haven't rambled too far off the.
No, that's perfect. Here's one. I don't know if this is a question necessarily, just an observation in the game that I really appreciated. One thing from a visual standpoint that was all over the place was how the edge of the map was handled. Normally in video games, you're constrained to an area, and Baldur's Gate's no different than that. But it always felt like whenever you're on sort of the border of something, you're like, oh, it's right out of my range or reach, but I could go right over there, and there's always like maybe a little doorway or something. And this may be a dumb analogy, but I remember the Gummy Bears cartoon as I was a kid did a bunch of that. They always like implied like all this other stuff that was right behind that door that you couldn't get through. And I think it just kind of like opens your imagination to just picturing like what's all the stuff that keeps going. I think it's a little kind of a world building trick to just imply the so much more that's out there. And I thought you guys did a really killer job of that.
Oh, well, thank you.
um,
Just one of the tricks to that is to make sure that the parts that you can get to are full of stuff to interact with, because that implies that the rest of the world is the same way. So you don't want to have people come into a room and look around and there's 3 things that highlight and that's it. That's all you got. You can pick up that book and you can light that lamp on the wall and that's it. Otherwise, go through that door and that it just doesn't feel like a world. So density is important in the areas that you can get to. So yeah, it's sheer quantity of interaction, and then you don't feel like, because a game where you can only interact with 3 things in the room, it feels mandatory to interact with those 3 things. Don't want that. You don't want anything to be mandatory. So you got to give a plethora of things that can be interacted with, so the player can feel like, oh yeah, I can interact with anything or not, and then they can just choose not, and that's fine. That it feels like they're not in an escape room or something where you can tell what's significant and what isn't.
Yeah. And I found myself spending plenty of time checking every jar. And there's enough delivery, like there's enough payoff when you do that. It's like a rotten, I don't care, I'm taking all the rotten stuff. They'll buy it back for a gold, whatever. But yeah, like the impulse for me is to, yes, do it. Let's go back in time a little bit to your Dungeons and Dragons days at TSR. I'm going to show. So one of the modules that you worked on. This is the 9th module put out by TSR. This is White Plume Mountain S2. I got a couple questions about it specifically. I want to show another little thing that I made. This is a publishing timeline, a TSR Dungeons and Dragons publishing interactive timeline thing. So we see, here in the 70s, this lane is some of the early modules, and here is White Plume Mountain with the original monochrome cover. And I was just sort of reading through it right before this, and I had a few questions. My Saturday group is running through. We're about a year and a half in. We're playing. We're just finishing up Caverns of Thracia by Janelle Jaquays, and then we're going to start going down the G series, and so probably later this year we're going to do White Plume Mountain. A couple questions came up. There's some fun things in here. There is a globe room which has a bunch of fake keys in it. One of them is comes with a ring that gives you invisibility, haste 8 charges, acts as a ring of protection +1, just a whole bunch of benefits. But then the trick is that it's kind of to mess with the players to see who will fight over. And as soon as the ring leaves the room, it no longer works. But the trade-off, there's a negative to the upside. You lose 1 hit point per year when you leave the room. But the ring loses all its powers when you leave the room. Is the ring supposed? I wondered if the ring is supposed to still do the negative effect after you leave, or just everything's gone.
So, David,
yes,
I want you to consider
this was 1979.
1979, and the sheer quantity of RPG scenarios that I have worked on since then. And then you want to ask me about one item that was in one room in in one scenario, 45 years ago. Uh, so you've seen, Fellowship of the Ring. I just watched it again this week, right? You know that
Yeah.
scene where they're in Moria, and Gandalf is leading the way, and he gets to a place where there's three different exits, and he looks around and he says, "I have no memory of this." You know,
Yeah.
yeah, just
It was long ago.
give me a big
Uh,
pointy hat, right? I have no memory of that.
for sure. Um, there were some really cool magical items in it. Talk about you're translating a couple of a series of important books right now. Can you want to talk about that for a moment?
Oh well, sure. I have got side projects. Like I mentioned earlier, I write books, mostly under the name of Lawrence Ellsworth, and uh, I had a really big project for the last 10 years. I've been um, translating new contemporary English versions of all of Alexandre Dumas' Musketeers novels, from the Three Musketeers on to The Man in the Iron Mask, which I just completed like last month. Um, so that's like 1.5 million words of French translation, and it was fun all the way to the end. And boy, am I glad it's done.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, so I do that. I also write about swordplay and swashbuckling movies in the Cinema of Swords series. I've got Substacks with weekly posts on both of those things. Um, uh, you know, go to my website, swashbucklingadventure.net, and it will tell you all about that stuff. Um, but yeah, one of the ways that I keep interested in working on RPGs every day, uh, on a day job, well after most of my peers have retired, is that I go home at night and write something different, and then every morning I come in and I'm fresh. So because I did a different thing in the evening and I didn't burn out. So uh, that's that's the idea behind keeping many different irons in the fire. It's important to maintain your sharpness and edge, uh, because you you don't want to get into repeating yourself. Now, one thing to consider about role playing games is, as we said, they're 50 years old. But the other thing about that is that they're only 50 years old. It's an art form that is essentially new, and we're still making it up as we go along. It's not set in stone. It's not like everybody has solved all the artistic issues of role playing games. Far, far from it. Um, One of the reasons why I have uh, even recently in my career moved from thing to thing is because there's still so much to do, and there's so much new ground to break, and uh, it's really bracing and invigorating to be doing it among so many hundreds of other people who are all pushing at the same envelope at the same time, as we are at Larian. And it's a collective design environment that I have never seen the like of, in all my previous. I mean, this is like a 12th studio, and I've never seen anything like this. Everybody's engaged, and it's. I think the results speak for themselves, I guess.
I think they do. And with that, Mr. Lawrence Schick, thank you so much for coming on Architects of Imagination.
My pleasure, absolutely. Pun
Before we go,
intended.
just last thing, thanks to our executive producer, Martika Barra, and the whole Architects of Imagination team. I'll put links in the description to this video of my D&D live streams. I've got a D&D YouTube channel as well where I live stream my OD&D games. And until next time, can't see what you guys are coming up with for DLC for the game and whatever's next.
Well, we're as eager to see it as you are.
All right, take
All
care,
right.
Lawrence.
Thanks a lot, David.
Yeah,
Bye,
bye.
all.